Just 10 days to go until the election. The result is too close to call. As the parties fight to pull ahead of their rivals, we bring them together for the Daily Politics election debates. We've been through their manifestos, we've heard their campaign speeches, and now we'll put to the test the men and women who want to form the next government, wield influence over it and make the big decisions after May the 7th. Welcome to the Daily Politics election debates of 2015. I'm Andrew Neil. Today we're focusing on home affairs. It's an area of policy that includes bread and butter election issues like immigration and crime. But so far it's not been a big focus of this campaign, so let's set that right today. Simon Thomas represents Plaid Cymru. Theresa May is the Conservative Home Secretary. Norman Baker is a Liberal Democrat. Stephen Woolfe represents UKIP. And Yvette Cooper is Labour's Shadow Home Secretary. Plus, I'm joined by the BBC's Home Editor, Mark Easton. Now, in a moment, our politicians will be setting out why they believe they've got the right answers in this key policy area. But first, here's a reminder of what's at stake. Being Home Secretary is often described as the toughest job in government, and it's easy to see why. The brief includes immigration, and last year, net migration to the UK reached 298,000. That's higher than in 2010, driven by a big rise in the number of people coming here to work. The threat to the UK from international terrorism was raised to severe in response to conflicts in Iraq and Syria, amid fears that hundreds of British-born jihadists may return after fighting with the so-called Islamic State. One of that group's most high-profile murderers, known as Jihadi John, grew up in the UK, leading to questions over how he and others became radicalised. So how do we strike the balance between security and protecting our civil liberties? There is some good news. Crime, on one measure, was down 11% last year in England and Wales, continuing a trend of long-term decline. But with police budgets likely to be under pressure after the election and a host of other issues to address, from what to do about drugs to tackling child abuse, this is one of the most challenging policy areas facing the political parties. Today, you decide who has the best answers. Well, just before we came on air, our politicians drew lots to decide the order in which they would make their opening pitches. Simon Thomas won, or lost, depending on your point of view. So, Simon Thomas, please take your position. Simon Thomas is a Plaid Cymru member of the Welsh Assembly. He was an MP until he lost his seat in 2005. Previously, he stood for the leadership of his party.
Plaid Cymru, the Party of Wales MPs, have been a progressive voice in Parliament for civil liberties, freedom and the needs of victims. Now, as a party dedicated to Wales, we want to see criminal justice and policing devolve to the National Assembly so you in Wales can decide on your priorities for safe communities and justice. Over the past 5 years, our MPs have worked to support the needs of armed forces veterans, to combat stalking and for victims' rights. We have opposed cuts to legal aid and the privatisation of the probation service. And we won't allow immigrants to be scapegoated for failures by this government to provide decent public services. We believe in reducing crime and reoffending rates by examining what works, not knee-jerks. In the next Parliament, we will be a voice for you and everyone in Wales and promote a just, tolerant and inclusive society.
Simon Thomas, who were you referring to in 2012 when you criticised the unrealistic Fisher-Price politics of some of the Plaid Cymru leadership candidates? It was your leader, Leanne Wood, wasn't it?
It wasn't Leanne Wood, but it might have been referring to some of the politics that you get in a leadership debate, which I'm sure we've all gone through in our own parties from time to time.
Very well, thank you very much. Theresa May is the longest-serving Home Secretary for more than 50 years. She's been at the Home Office since the 2010 election. She's also a former chairman of the Conservative Party.
Under this government, the country is safer than ever before. We've cut crime by more than a quarter, even as we've had to reduce police spending. We've passed a Modern Slavery Act, reformed Stop and Search, and faced down the Police Federation. We're exposing child abuse, helping people with mental health problems and dealing with miscarriages of justice. Immigration is still too high, but we've capped economic migration, reformed family visas and shut down 850 bogus colleges. I've excluded hate preachers and got rid of Abu Hamza and Abu Qatada. So the choice is clear. Back to a Labour Home Office which they admitted was not fit for purpose. Or the Conservatives, who have a plan to reform free movement, cut immigration, defeat extremism and keep cutting crime.
Theresa May, David Cameron said he wouldn't want to be leader after a second term, assuming he gets one, that is. He also named you as a possible successor. You must be counting down the days.
There's only one leadership contest that matters at the moment, Andrew, and that's who's going to be in number 10 Downing Street after the general election on the 7th of May, and that's a clear choice, David Cameron or Ed Miliband propped up by the SNP.
I had a feeling you were going to say that. Thank you. Norman Baker was a Liberal Democrat Minister of State at the Home Office until last year, when he resigned, saying working at the department was like walking through mud.
The Liberal Democrats want to protect your freedom, your right to privacy, your right to protest, your right to walk down the street without harassment from the police. What sets the Lib Dems apart from the other parties is that we know you can have these freedoms at the same time as being protected by the police and our security services. In Home Affairs, we apply a calm, evidence-based approach, for example, in drugs policy, and we're interested in what works, not necessarily just what sounds good. We deplore the populism and fear-stoking that other parties engage in. In government, we have helped cut crime and rebuild the immigration system.
Norman Baker, you were a Home Office Minister. You must have learned a lot on the job. So do you still think that the death of Dr. David Kelly, the government scientist, was part of some great conspiracy?
I never used the word conspiracy, Andrew, on that particular matter, and that book was written in 2007. But I think politicians of all parties ought to be prepared to question what the popular consensus is and follow the evidence in that matter as in every other.
OK, thank you. Stephen Woolfe is a UKIP MEP for the northwest of England. He's also the party's spokesman on migration and financial affairs.
The inability to control our borders and know who enters and leaves our country creates disastrous gaps in our security. Without strong laws that can arrest and deport international criminals, the safety of our people is compromised. This is why UKIP will reform our broken immigration system. Firstly, Britain should control our own borders, not the EU. Secondly, UKIP will establish a fair, ethical, non-discriminatory immigration system that puts the needs of Britain first and ends the discrimination between EU and Commonwealth citizens. Thirdly, we propose a cap on highly skilled workers to a maximum of 50,000 and thus ensure that Britain is a top-ranked world economy. Lastly, we will stop unskilled immigration for 5 years to allow wages for the lower paid to rise.
Stephen Woolfe, defending the UKIP manifesto, Nigel Farage protested that it featured one fully black person and another one of our leading spokesmen who is half black.
Yes.
Is that the kind of language you're happy with?
Well, when I was talking once to a Labour MP, Paul Boateng, he once advised me that instead of using the words mixed race or quarter caste, which is what I grew up with, he said use the word quadroon. So I think languages change over time, and we just should get over the fact that we're a colourblind party that believes in anybody getting to the top or rising through it, irrespective of who you are.
OK, thank you. Yvette Cooper has been Labour's Shadow Home Secretary since 2011. She held a series of ministerial jobs in the last Labour government, Work and Pension Secretary under Gordon Brown.
Everyone should be able to feel safe and get justice. But 999 weights are up, prosecutions of serious criminals are down, crime's changing and the police can't keep up. So Labour will protect neighbourhood policing and stop the Tories cutting 10,000 more officers. We'll abolish police and crime commissioners to protect the front line. Bring in a new victims law, stronger action on child abuse, domestic violence, online crime and extremism. And on immigration, no divisive rhetoric, just practical plans. The Tories' no ifs, no buts targets in tatters. So we'll bring in 1,000 extra border staff for stronger border controls and new benefit rules so people coming here can't claim for 2 years. We'll welcome the international students we need, but stop dodgy firms exploiting migration to undercut local pay. Immigration's important, but it needs to be controlled and managed so the system is fair. We want our communities strong, not divided. That's what Labour's plan means.
Yvette Cooper, after the next election, if Labour wins, you may have the difficult job of trying to negotiate spending cuts with the Chancellor. Will it be a help or a hindrance that the person could be Ed Balls, your husband?
Well, look, we've set out. We will make sure that we can keep the neighbourhood police on the street by finding £800 million of savings, including from cutting police and crime commissioners. So it's not just Ed Balls, it's not just me, it's every single one of our Labour shadow cabinets being very clear how we'll find savings, how we'll make sure that we can pay for everything, but how we'll also keep police on the beat.
All right, thank you very much. Let's get on with the debate now, and let's begin with immigration. Theresa May, no ifs, no buts. You heard Yvette Cooper quote there. David Cameron pledged to get net migration down to the tens of thousands, and he told people to vote the Conservatives out if he hadn't. Well, he hasn't. So why shouldn't they be voted out?
I think what we've shown in government is, first of all, that we understand why immigration is an important issue for people. It does have an impact on public services. It does have an impact on jobs and on wages at the lower end of the income scale. None of these were accepted by the last Labour government.
But I'm not asking about the last Labour government. I'm asking why you so manifestly failed to keep your pledge and told us to vote you out if you hadn't.
And as I was saying, Andrew, what we have done is recognised immigration as an important topic. We've made changes to the immigration system. We've tightened up on family visas, on students. As I said earlier, 850 colleges can no longer bring in overseas students because it was a backdoor route into work rather than to study. But
none of that's been enough, has it? You promised in the tens of thousands. The latest net migration figure is almost 300,000. Yes. You couldn't be further out.
And we've accepted that we have failed to meet that particular target.
So why should we trust you this time?
Because, as I'm saying, we've actually shown that we have made some changes to the immigration system, and crucially we've set out a credible plan for what we would do for the future in terms of tightening up not just on EU immigration but also on people from outside the EU.
But you failed in the past 5 years. Why should we believe any promises for the next 5 years?
We've actually seen that we've made changes in some areas, like the 850 bogus colleges. If you say to me, Andrew, that there's nothing that we have done in immigration, then you're wrong. What we have done is not met that particular target.
Well, you didn't just met it, you missed it by a factor of 3. Indeed, net migration is higher now than it was when you came to office.
And in fact, one of the reasons net migration from outside the EU is lower now than it was from 2010. But one of the reasons is that we have seen a significant increase in EU migration. And we're one party that will be in government that has actually set out what we would do, a credible plan which involves changing welfare benefits, negotiating a new package with the EU, putting free movement into that.
Non-EU migration is actually almost about the same as it was when you came to office.
Well, can I just point out that
it's another gap between the rhetoric and the reality.
Non-EU migration, non-EU migration, the bit you can control, is considerably over.
That's right.
100,000, which was your overall target.
But if you include students, it's 291.
But I want to come to you, Yvette Cooper, because your manifesto now talks about controlled migration, managed migration, fair migration. But you do not put a single figure or a target that would allow us to hold you to account. But we have the evidence of your record, and the evidence is that voters shouldn't trust you on this.
Well, we've seen what happened when the Tories set this target, and it is now in tatters. And I don't think people will believe politicians who make promises about targets. The Tories are trying to do the same thing again, make the same promise again in the next Parliament as they made in the last Parliament. And I just think
I'm asking about your promise.
And
you are vague. There is no way we know anything about the numbers you are talking about. What we do know is that in power, you virtually opened the doors and net migration reached historic record figures. That's what we should judge you by.
Well, in fact, we've said we've changed our approach on immigration. And in fact, as you pointed out earlier, net migration is now the highest it's been for 10 years. In fact, net migration had fallen in the last 5 years of the Labour government. But look, the things we've said are the practical things we believe should change. Immigration is important for Britain, but it's got to be controlled and managed in a way that makes the system fair.
But you won't give us a figure.
Well, that's why we'd have stronger border controls and 1,000 more staff to do the job. It's why we change benefit rules so that you can't claim benefits when you first arrive. And we do something that none of the other parties would do, which is to tackle the exploitation by dodgy firms and agencies who use immigration to undercut pay and jobs. Well, they simply don't.
You're going to have to tackle.
You haven't stopped agencies recruiting from abroad. You haven't stopped the exploitation and the undercutting, which causes huge problems and anxieties.
But to do that, Stephen Wolfe, you would also have to tackle the large corporations like Morris Morrisons and Tesco's who rely on large labour in their distribution centres, are you going to apply the same principles to them? Because they can rely on, very strongly, on large-scale, low-scale immigration coming in to replace workers and make sure that wages are pushed down to the maximum wage. You're targeting one area, and it's absolutely clear. Plaid Cymru and their leader, Liam Wood, said in the debates between the leaders that you cannot reduce migration in this country, net or otherwise, unless you're outside of the European Union.
But we're going to tackle exploitation.
You are honest about it. I agree
Let
with that.
Yvette Cooper reply.
But our approach is to tackle the exploitation. I mean, what Nigel Farage has said is he opposes increasing the minimum wage. We know that UKIP MPs and MEPs have voted repeatedly to cut employment rights. That would make it easier to exploit. What you want to do is to close your backs on Europe, but let the exploitation carry on. We're saying
let me ask
carry
you
on being
this.
part of Europe.
Let me ask you
We have
this.
to tackle the exploitation.
Let me ask you this figure.
Unfair.
It's a straightforward question. The latest net migration figures are 298,000. Is that too much, too little, or about right?
We want to see it come down, but we think part of that has got to be to deal with the way agencies and employers are driving low-skilled migration because they can use it to undercut local pay. That is unfair on all workers.
Could you tell us can you tell us by how much you would like to bring it down if 298,000 is too much?
Well, we've been through this already. I think it's wrong to set a target in the way the Tories have done.
So you can't.
I don't think people will believe it. I don't think people will believe it. It's just been in tatters.
But it will be under 300,000 will be the Labour target.
Come down, but we do think as well there are different kinds of migration. So we should support overseas university students coming to Britain, contributing to this country, but do much more to tackle illegal immigration. That's not even included in Theresa May's target. That's why she's just ignored illegal immigration.
That your manifesto makes clear you wouldn't include is asylum seekers. It actually says you'd ensure Britain provides a refuge for those fleeing persecution. Now, the Prime Minister has said that he specifically ruled out the UK taking any of the Mediterranean refugees and migrants coming over. Would you rule that out too?
Well, I think we do need to do more, and we've said the area area we think we should do more is particularly around Syria, where we know there are vulnerable
I'm asking you
people
about the Mediterranean.
I know.
The ones we've seen, the horrifying pictures of people coming over in boats. At the moment, it's the southern European countries that are having to take all responsibility for looking after those. Are you saying under a Labour government you would take none?
That's right. Or I think all
That's right.
I think, hang on, you're right that they are, and they are facing huge pressures, and the government was wrong to stop the search and rescue in the autumn because that was turning our backs on people who were being left to drown.
That's not the question.
We should all work together, I think, to address the problems.
Will you take in more boat people
or
not?
Moment, we don't know how many will need asylum. It's right that they should get the support in the first country where they arrive and should be assessed.
Frontex and the European Union have said
the European countries, I think, ought to work together when we see how many of those people need asylum. All the countries should work together. Britain already is
So you won't commit to taking in more boat people?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to see how many people need support.
But if we all work together, we have to take our fair share.
I think we should take more from the Syria as part of the Syrian programme, which the government has so far refused to do.
But the single biggest group of people coming over from the shores of Libya are Syrian.
Exactly.
So you would take them?
That's why I think we should
check their nationality when they come over. If they're Syrian, we'll have them, but if they're Eritrean...
So if you're a Syrian boat person, that's all right.
I think this is getting a bit confused.
There's
a parallel programme to support those from Syria, from the camps, who are too vulnerable to survive in the camps, whereas Theresa May has currently resisted taking those, and I think that is wrong. We've always had a strong obligation to those who just...
I need to bring in Norman Baker. We've not heard from Norman Baker. Immigration isn't even one of your campaign priorities, even though it tops the concern of voters. The Lib Dems are just totally out of touch on this subject.
Well, we're not, because we've participated in government. We've helped contribute towards the sensible steps that have been taken in the last 5 years to deal with immigration, and we're dealing with it in a way that we want people here to work and contribute to the economy, and the fact that the economy is doing pretty well is partly due to the fact that we've got people coming over here working, paying their taxes. At the same time, we want people here to work, not to claim. So we've been working with the Conservatives in government to make sure we eliminate the abuses in the immigration system.
But you didn't sign on to the Tory target. That was a Tory target, not a coalition target.
Because you can't have a target for the number of days it's going to rain each year. It's a non-deliverable target. So we certainly didn't deliver that. But what we want to do is to ensure that our public services, where they need people to come in here and work in our public services, are supported. Secondly, we want to make sure students are here to learn properly, not the bogus colleges we shut down, but students who are generally here to learn. We want to support those. But we also want to stop people who are here simply for claiming purposes. But I think it's important to have a rational debate about this. And there's too much heat in this, and there's too much chasing.
Is 298,000 too much, too little, or about right?
I think it's probably too much, to be honest with you.
It is. All right. Stephen Woolf, your leader, Nigel Farage, he's argued that people with HIV shouldn't be allowed into the UK. Should that apply to all serious illnesses, or are you just singling one out?
No, what Nigel was using that was an example of international health tourism against those who want a national health service. And what he didn't say...
The wrong figures and the wrong costings.
What he didn't say was we would not allow people who have those illnesses and diseases to be treated here. What he was using very clearly was that those people who come to this country under our system would actually have, whether they're tourists, whether they're students, whether they're working, would actually have insurance policies. So that would mean, therefore, that the National Health Service is protected. Of course, those who are already here would continue to be treated. Those who happen to be here and we find out that their insurance policies, you can shake your head as much as you like, Norman. You can shake your head as much as you like. But the policy is, in many countries where they have a health service, where you come into those countries with your own insurance policies, you are treated over there. And what we were making clear is that's the first priority. But if they are here without those insurance policies, of course, we're treated. What are we?
All right. No. What's wrong with that, Norman?
Well, we've taken steps as a government, actually, to bring in an NHS charge for those coming into the country. So we've dealt with that. But let's be quite clear about this. The reason Nigel Farage mentioned HIV wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate attempt to stoke things up and to appeal to 10% of the population who might vote UKIP. It's a very nasty intervention on his part.
They're doing much more than that. They're actually doing much more than that. What they're doing is trying to make people afraid of patients coming from overseas, when the reality is we know that British patients owe their lives to doctors, to nurses who've come from overseas to work in our national health service.
Simon Thomas.
26% of doctors in Wales are from overseas.
All right. Simon Thomas, speaking of stoking things up, one of your candidates at this elections believes many English migrants, their word, into rural Wales are, quote, out-and-out racists. Do you?
He was talking about the BNP, who are now, of course, supporting UKIP, and particularly...
well, no, I'll tell you... hold on. What you said the BNP...
He was referring to Mr Griffin moving into...
Hold on. It wasn't just that. He said many English migrants, no mention of the BNP,
he said
into rural Wales are out-and-out racist. They are leaving English cities to get away from multicultural society.
This is the phenomenon as well.
Do you agree with that?
No, this is the phenomenon that we saw 15 years ago when the article was written.
Are you blaming you?
Known as
on everything else.
Known as white flight, when there was a tendency for some people to move out to the cities in England, and they didn't just come to Wales, they went to other places as well. He was referring to that. He was referring in particular to the BNP making their home in rural Wales.
Do you agree with him?
At the time, he was correct. That was 15 years ago. There's been a sea change since then.
Simon Thomas, can I come in? I'm interested in something you say in your manifesto. You clearly want more migrants to come to Wales. You talk about
the need to
attract internationals. Indeed. Is the phrase that you use. Now, the problem here is that you could have a situation, if you had devolved power, as you said you want, a situation where Wales wants to attract internationals, whereas England perhaps doesn't want quite as many internationals. What would you think? Barbed wire, border controls, visas?
No, we don't even have that between England and France, do we? So we're not going to go there. No, what we need is a Welsh...
Well, we do have a UK border, actually. That's exactly what we do have.
We don't have barbed wire.
It's a meaningless promise, though, isn't it? I mean, meaningless pledge, because you can't do it without basically cutting yourselves off.
No, because we want the voice of Wales to be heard in the migration service. We have seen the effect on our universities of the attacks on bogus colleges. I'm not saying for a moment they weren't bogus colleges.
Well, your universities are not bogus colleges,
No, they're not, but taking away the post-study visa...
University applications from overseas to universities in the UK have actually
not in Wales. Not in Wales. The ones from the old Commonwealth countries have gone down.
Well, maybe that's your problem rather than the Home Secretary's problem.
It's not, because...
Well, why are they down at Welsh universities and not at other universities?
Because you have to look at where those applications are from. And the old Commonwealth countries, places like Nigeria, places like India, are not sending as many overseas students now to Welsh colleges and universities.
But the Home Secretary says they're sending them to the rest of the country's universities.
University applications overall are up.
University applications overall are up, yes, but not the ones...
Why are they not going to Wales then? What have you done?
Would you then agree with UKIP that says we should take the university students out of the numbers, and
they shouldn't be part of the numbers.
And also, which is the key part of our principle, is that any immigration policy into this country must be fair and ethical, that treats EU citizens the same as non-EU citizens.
All right, but it's a fair point about taking students out.
Theresa May, can I ask you specifically on students? I mean, back of an envelope calculation, but probably we have got 200,000 fewer students coming to Britain over the course of the Parliament than we might have had under the old levels. Probably cost our economy somewhere between £2 and £3 billion not to have them. Is that value for money?
No. What we have done is actually dealt with the abuse that was in the system that we saw with the points-based system that the Labour Party introduced when the numbers
so
went
all
up.
those students who were coming were illegal immigrants, were
What
they?
we have done was dealt with the fact that there were colleges in this country that were effectively bringing people in under guise of being students to work rather than to be students. There's no cap on the number of students who can come to our universities
You've
to
got
do
the
a
numbers
genuine
down,
degree.
and your
genuine
immigration
degree.
minister was very joyful on the television about how you've managed to reduce the number of students coming to Britain. I'm just saying there's an economic cost to that.
Because what we saw with students was that they were often coming to bogus colleges and they were coming to work and not to study. But there is a reason for keeping students. I think virtually every party says, other parties says students should come out of the numbers. There's a reason for keeping students in the numbers, apart from the fact that internationally they're in the numbers because they stay longer than 1 year. But also because if you look at the figures for last year, the number of students actually who came into the country minus the number of students who left the country was 85,000. So this is not just about temporary migration. Very often it's a way to permanent migration.
That means there's universities across Britain who want to be part of a growing international market, who want to be competing to get the best international talent from all over the world, and they're not able to because they're being squeezed down.
No,
and that is the reality of what you're doing. You're denying us the chance of the billions of pounds.
Investing in those countries. Hold on,
let Yvette Cooper finish.
And at the same time, you've doubled the number of people coming on student visitor visas, which are for temporary courses where there's far fewer checks and where the independent inspectorate, Borders Inspectorate, has said the abuse is taking place.
Quick response from the Home Secretary.
Hold on. There is no evidence
that
abuse is taking place in the limited student visitor visas.
That's not what the
but
said.
what we have done is dealt with bogus colleges, and what we know is that there is no cap on the number of university students who can come in to a genuine. They are, Yvette. The numbers show that more people are coming to universities. More people are coming to universities from overseas, and that is good for our universities. And we welcome people to come from the brightest and the best. But Yvette says that she wants to have no target on immigration. Chuka Amuna has said that there should be a target actually to increase the number of students who are coming here. And the answer, Yvette, to immigration policy is not to have stronger border controls, because if you want to bring more people into the country, it doesn't matter how many border officers you've got. More people are going to come into the country.
You're not doing proper checks, and you're not making sure that people don't overstay their visa.
And we have overstayed. Excuse me, we have overstayed our time on this subject. We have more to get through, and there's no point trying to talk through me because I've got the loudest voice in the room. My mother was half deaf, and you didn't get heard unless you had a voice like this. Let's move on to police and crime. Yvette Cooper, you predicted a perfect storm for policing. Alan Johnson, the last Labour Home Secretary, said crime would rise under the Tories. Crime rates are at a record low. You just got it wrong.
Well, what we said was that community safety was at risk, and I think it is. Volume crimes such as car crimes and burglary and theft have fallen, and that's really good. But we've had increasing reports of the most serious crimes, including violent crime, rape, child sex offences, domestic violence, and in all of those areas, prosecutions have fallen. And that means that victims aren't getting justice.
All right, Mark.
Just on that violent crime point, because your manifesto makes quite a claim. It says violent crimes have gone up. Now, that's odd, because the best official measure of crime trends shows that violent crime has fallen 36% since the election. So are you just trying to frighten people, or what?
Well, you know that in the last 12 months, reports of violent crime have gone up.
That's recorded crime, more people coming forward. We understand that, but that's not the same.
But it is a very significant increase in violent crime reported in the last 12 months.
Which is good news.
Of course, but that is a challenge for the police. And that is a serious challenge because especially at a time when you've got prosecutions
saying violent crimes have gone up implies, to most people reading that means that there's more violent crime. But that's not true, is it?
Well, except that we don't know in terms of the cause of the reporting.
Well, if you don't know, why have you claimed it in your manifesto?
Now, hang on a second, because reported violent crime to the police has increased in the last 12 months.
Because they've changed the way they record and because more people are coming forward.
This is what the police are having to deal with. But hang on a second, Mark, because what the police are then doing is they are not prosecuting. That means victims... but it's an important linked one, because more crimes are being reported to the police, but fewer victims are getting justice and more criminals are getting away with it. Look at something like rape, where you've had a 30% increase in the number of crimes being reported to the police, and yet around an 8% drop in the number of prosecutions, convictions falling. That means more rapists getting away with it and fewer victims getting justice, because the police are being overstretched. The figures are even worse for some of the new and emerging crimes like child sex offences.
All right, let me come to Norman Baker. All right, hold on.
10,000 police officers
and
right
we must
now,
let someone else speak.
Wants.
We must let someone else speak as well.
No, this is
Norman Baker, then the Home Secretary.
This is pure scaremongering. The fact is that crime has gone down. It's now at record low levels compared to, both under police recorded crime and the Independent Crime Survey, which started in 1981. The reason we've got more people reporting crimes is because we've been, as a government, and I did it as a minister, we encourage people to report crimes. We encourage them to come forward with historic allegations of rape and sexual abuse, and we want to deal with it. So that's why those numbers are reported. Calls to the police are going up.
OK,
but
let me ask the Home...
hold
on. Let me ask the Home Secretary. The Home Office already cut its policing budget by 20% under you. Under Tory plans for the deficit, your department will face another 18% cut. That's the average for unprotected departments, of which yours is one. Where will the axe fall?
No. Andrew, first of all, on the figures, the rate of that we're looking at in terms of the cuts to departments over the next 2 years is actually the same rate of change as we've seen over the last period.
OK, so where will the axe fall?
What we are looking at, I've not set out the Home Office budget in detail, and what we're very clear about is that, as you said yourself, we were here in 2010. We had to make those decisions because of the state of the economy we're left by. And
but I'm asking about the next 5 years. You've got another 18% cut to make. In my experience, the second 18% is always a bit tougher than the first 18%. Where will the axe fall?
No. Well, you're using an 18% figure over 2 years. And in fact, what we're looking at is the same rate of change over the 2 years that we've seen in the past. Everybody said it couldn't be done because crime would only go up. Right. Crime has not gone up.
OK, let's accept you've done it. Where is the next 18% coming from?
There is still scope within the system. HMIC have made very clear there is still scope by, for example, for police forces working together to be able to make savings. And what we have seen over the last 5 years is that the front line's been protected. The proportion of officers on the front line
I wasn't asking about the last 5 years.
Despite the fact that police forces have seen a cut in there.
So Hugh Ord, the Association of Chief Police Officers, said that the cuts of 20% that will come from the police budget after you're re-elected will lead to the risk to citizens being exponential. Is he wrong? Is he the sort of person who knows the business and concerned about it? Is he wrong or is he right?
Well, we heard the Association of Chief Police Officers saying that crime would go up in 2010 when we were going to cut police budgets. It was a group of the Labour Party, the ACPO and the Police Federation all said that crime can only go up if you cut police budgets. In fact, what our hard-working police officers and police forces have shown is that you can do more for less. They have worked together, they've collaborated on a number of areas, they've saved money and they've protected the front line.
OK, let me come to Yvette Cooper, because Ed Miliband said yesterday on the BBC that the Home Office budget would be cut under Labour. So where would your axe fall?
That's right, and that's why we've identified £800 million of savings in order to protect the front line, including from requiring forces to work together, but also including getting rid of the subsidy for gun licences, getting rid of police and crime commissioners, which is just
Home Secretary just said that
should save £130 million. Well, actually, they haven't. They've still, on the Home Office's own figures, got a gap of £17 million, a black hole in the police funding to cover gun licences, which is still considerably cheaper than fishing licences. I don't think we should spend £130 million in the next Parliament on police and crime commissioners. Let's put that into the front line. Our plans mean we can stop 10,000 police officers being cut that Theresa May would have to cut, and means that we could therefore keep neighbourhood police on the beat, which Chief Constables are saying they just cannot deliver under Theresa May's plan.
All right, response from the Home Secretary.
I'm interested in where Yvette says she's going to get the money for these police officers, because, of course, all the items that she has identified as being set aside for paying for police officers, actually the Treasury spokesman in the Labour Party have said would be used to cut the deficit and wouldn't be available, therefore, to the Home Office. So which is it, Yvette? Who is right?
No, we've made
the
very
Shadow
clear.
Chancellor and his Treasury team, or you?
This is £800 million we can use to protect the front line, and we also.
So you wouldn't make any. So you wouldn't make cuts. You would simply redistribute resources.
We would have a reduction in the Home Office budget. That's what we're expecting, but it wouldn't be the same extreme cuts.
How much would it be?
Theresa May needs to do under her plans.
How much?
Well, that would depend on the spending review and the growth that we get at the time, but it won't go for the deep extreme cuts cuts that Theresa May means. Theresa May says she's going to have to get rid of 10,000 police officers in the first few years alone.
So the truth is we don't know from you either.
Yeah, and the IFS has already said that neither of these two parties have actually put a costed manifesto, as UKIP has, to be able to identify where the cuts are coming from.
Stephen,
you keep mentioning cuts. You can say we're going to deal with the welfare issue, but you never actually put which departments, how much, how long and when.
Because UKIP has actually signed up to exactly the same extreme cuts as the Tories has. It's just a more Tory than the Tory approach.
Let me bring Mark back.
What we're doing is saying we've got £800 million.
Savings.
That is enough to protect 10,000 police officers for the front line.
That money has already been signed by your Treasury spokesman for dealing with the deficit, not for those police officers. And I seem to recall that the Labour Party actually went through the lobby with the Labour Party went through the lobby with the Conservative Party and the Liberal Democrats and agreed to 30 billion cuts in government over.
What is the answer to Yvette Cooper's question? What would the level of cuts you likely have to make mean for the number of police officers?
Well, that is not actually a matter for the Home Secretary, as Yvette herself has admitted. It is a matter for chief constables to decide what the number of police officers they have.
You set the parameters by setting the budget. It's not entirely unconnected. We've already lost 16,000 police officers with your first round of cuts. How many will we lose in your second round?
Andrew, it's not possible to say what is going to happen to police numbers.
Do you think it's OK?
It is not possible to say what is going to happen to police numbers, because that will be a matter for the chief constables, together with their police and crime commissioners, to determine when they know what their budget is.
Do you think it's OK to cut 10,000 police, though? Because I don't.
What I think is right, Yvette...
You're not making the budget.
You're not protecting the budget.
Provide the £800 million. That is enough to safeguard those 10,000.
That money's already been...
Can I ask the Home Secretary, you say in your manifesto Labour did serious damage to police officer morale, and then you said in your introduction here today that you faced down the police fed. A survey of police officers only last year found 94% of officers say morale is low or very low, blaming you, your cuts, your changes to pensions. It's really a case of the pot calling the kettle black, isn't it?
No, I said what I did about the Police Federation because I was absolutely right that the Police Federation did have to make changes, and they accepted that.
Do you blame low morale on Labour?
No,
because they're blaming it on you.
No, the Police Federation had to make changes, and they have been making those changes. And yes, we did have a review of pay and conditions for police officers. Across the public sector, pensions have changed. Actually, police have got a good deal in terms of the changes that have been made in terms of pensions.
Do you think it's at a good level now, police morale?
I think what is important that our hard-working police officers out there are actually getting on with the job.
Is it at a good level, though?
They're getting on with the job day in and day out of keeping this country safe.
OK, Norman Baker, you said working with Theresa May at the Home Office was, quote, like walking through mud. What did you mean?
Well, the Home Office is the cutting edge of the coalition. We had a perfectly personal and good relationship, I think, but I think after 4.5 years as a minister, I deserve time off for good behaviour.
What does walking through mud mean?
Well, it means there were constant challenges on policy, which we tried to resolve, but we did so in an amicable way. But can I make a point about crime? Because all the talks here about cuts, there's another way of dealing with this. I want to continue to see crime drop down, and one of the ways we do that is by increasing crime prevention, which I did as Crime Prevention Minister. For example, we've taken steps to reduce the attractiveness of stealing mobile phones. Car theft is much lower than it was because of technology has been advanced. Okay. Designing out crime in local communities. So we can actually bring crime down, and therefore the need for the police to intervene becomes less. That's got to be a key part of it.
Theresa May, did you see Norman Baker walk through mud?
No, as Norman said, we had a good relationship. And
he said
there were a number of issues on which we just sat down and talked through them. And decided what.
That was the mud bit, was it?
Stephen Woolf, can I ask you, one way of getting crime down, of course, is to reduce the number of crimes. And I notice in your manifesto you say you're going to conduct a review of what is and what is not a criminal offence. Which current crimes do you not think should be offences?
Well, I think what we're looking at there is looking at the European human rights position in that, because we have to take a lead from some of the crimes that we consider keeping people in prisons because of that, or they've got a process of appeal. I think the other area that we've got to look at is allowing those people who come into the country who have criminal offences that we allow in, whether they're from the European Union or not. And remember, that's something that's applied into many.
The point you're making here is that you're going to have a review to decide what is a crime, what is not a crime. I just want to know, what is it that's currently a crime that you don't think should be a crime?
Well, of course, you've got many cases which you have in terms of road traffic offences or in terms of criminal offences.
Well,
Look, as a criminal barrister, when I was in my early cases, we had to deal with offences that related to parking on double yellow lines, which have been brought into the case.
But that's not a criminal offence.
These types
so
of
give us an
low
example of
end.
what is currently
Well, this is exactly why we're going to have a
offence.
review. There's lots of people
Well, give me one example
offensive.
of what is currently a criminal offence that you don't think should be a criminal offence.
Well, I can't. And that's why we're going to have a review.
All right, if you can't, let me come to...
How about using inflammatory language? Would that be a criminal offence?
If you can't,
well,
you can't.
if you
Let me
case,
come
then Liberal Democrats
to...
would have been in prison a long time ago, wouldn't
All
they?
right,
The
well,
amount
let
of
me come to
allegations you've made about me
Simon
being
Thomas.
racist. You've called
Simon,
our party
hold on.
racist, and therefore you've been insulting me.
I haven't
Isn't that
insulted you at all.
inflammatory language?
All right, let's move on. Simon Thomas, you want control of policing in Wales to transfer to local control.
Absolutely. We don't want any of these to be in charge of policing in Wales.
But except that as a result of them being in charge, crime in Wales is at a record low. So if it ain't broke, why fix it?
Well, there's two things here. Recorded crime actually has gone up in Wales 4% and 2%.
Well, we've had that argument.
But we've gone over that. We don't really understand why crime has dropped so significantly. There's a lot of theories out there as to
But
why
it
that's
has.
happened. But it has, I agree.
So why?
It's gone hand in hand with a big reduction in the police force numbers in Wales as well.
Well, maybe there were too many police.
Well, I think the two were correlated rather than directly related to each other. They happened at the same time, but we don't have evidence that the one has led to the other. I think the trend and the decline in violent crime in particular predates even Theresa May's efforts in this regard. But what we have got is a clear recommendation from the Silk Commission to devolve policing in Wales. A recommendation has been rejected, unfortunately, by the two main parties that were on the Silk Commission themselves, the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, have rejected that recommendation, which is the case in Scotland, it's the case in Northern Ireland, and we haven't seen policing
I thought the Labour manifesto comes out in favour of all Wales policing.
Which manifesto?
The Labour manifesto. All Wales policing will give the
Welsh...
Welsh
That's a policing plan in which the National Assembly has a view and a voice.
Would you give Wales control of its own police? Let's ask the Shadow Home Secretary.
We would devolve policing decisions so that the Welsh Assembly can draw up a policing plan. It would have to be in consultation with the Home Secretary. I think that's right, given the amount of cross-border crime there is, particularly around between North Wales and Merseyside and other areas of the country. But we do think that the Welsh Assembly should be able to draw up the policing plan with the priorities for Wales.
There you go.
Whatever happens, we need to get rid of the police and crime commissioners in Wales. They have a waste of time.
We do.
Waste of space.
I think have that
well, I'm sure Labour agrees with you in that as well. I see a nascent coalition. Very briefly, because we need to move on.
And the Liberal Democrats would
let the Home Secretary speak.
If you look at the forces which have Conservative police and crime commissioners, the number of neighbourhood police officers has gone up by nearly 6,000. The forces with Labour police and crime commissioners, the number of neighbourhood police officers has gone down by 700. That's the difference police and crime commissioners make.
All right, let's move on. We're going to move on to what bit of move on didn't you understand? We're moving on to anti-terror legislation and our approach to the terrorist threat. Now, Theresa May, last month you gave a speech which warned that Muslim extremists, quote, the game was up. You suggested you could close mosques which harboured extremists. I noticed none of that made your manifesto. It was just talk.
No, it wasn't talk. We have an extremism strategy. We've made it clear in the manifesto that we would put in place an extremism strategy. There are a number of measures that will be part of that. Because what we see is we do see radicalisation taking place. When we came into government, we thought it was important not just to look at violent extremism, but to look at non-violent extremism. We now think it's important to look at extremism across the board and to actually base what we're doing on collectively saying we have a set of British values which we believe people in the United Kingdom should sign up to and should be part of.
So why didn't your proposals make the manifesto?
Well, there are a number of proposals from the extremism strategy in the manifesto.
But not these ones that I read out.
The strategy, well, the speech made clear that what we will be doing is looking at institutions, looking at introducing new orders for banning groups, for example, who don't currently meet the threshold for prescription. There are a number of things we'll be doing, but crucially, what we will be basing our work on is actually recognising British values and encouraging people to sign up to those British values.
We would assume that a British Home Secretary would subscribe to British values. But did the Lib Dems and Norman Baker, when they blocked what was dismissively called the Snoopers Charter, an attempt to give the security services greater abilities to listen in and find out what was going on, were they guilty of putting people in this country at risk of terror attack?
There is a very real issue around the communications data question. It's not a Snoopers Charter. It's not looking into people's...
But did they put the country at risk?
You put use the term.
I said what's dismissively called that. You heard me. Did they put the country at risk?
As we see the ability to access communications data degrading, then it makes it harder for our law enforcement agencies to catch serious criminals and paedophiles, and it makes it harder for us to be able to identify.
Okay. What do you say to that, Norman Baker?
Well, there's a clear need to make sure that we balance the needs of the security services and the police with civil liberties for those who are innocent in this country. That's a difficult balance to strike, and it's one that has to be looked at coolly and rationally rather than with any sort of heat. We've made it very plain throughout that we were happy to introduce legislation where it was necessary. We were very happy, for example, for IP matching to be dealt with, and we were happy to bring that forward. And Theresa will know that when I arrived at the Home Office, I produced a paper for her and the department which suggested ways in which we could deal with security service concerns at the same time as enhancing our liberties. And the government, the coalition government, let's be clear about this, has quite a good record on some of these matters. For example, we had the Freedoms Act which came in, which got rid of the ID cards. We didn't have 90 days without detention, which the Labour Party...
You also got rid of control orders.
We did, because
and then you kind of reinvented them.
No, we didn't reinvent them, because TPIMs are a different thing altogether. Control
orders...
Well,
except that you have reinstituted the geographical element of control orders, which weren't in the original TPIMs.
That's a small part of it, but let's be quite...
it was a big part of it.
No, let's be quite clear. The control orders were discredited. They were continually ruled as ineffective by the courts and struck down. 7 people went missing. Only six of them weren't found. Only one of them was.
How many are under TPIMs at the moment?
I can't tell you that. I'm not the Home Office at the moment.
All right, Secretary of State.
I think the latest figures show that it was 1 person.
1. So that's it.
Despite all the people coming back from Syria and despite all the concerns that have been raised about terror suspects and so on, they've only got 1 person under TPIM, and that is because they weakened the powers and removed the relocation. Hang on a second. Removed the relocation powers. I think we warned from the start that those relocation powers, that was the most important aspect of the control orders.
Because it took them out of the local community where they had been operating.
Exactly. Stops people associating with other terror suspects. We know there are considerable questions about whether the West London network was able to start operating again and sending people to Syria and other places.
Let me just hear from Stephen Woolf, and then we'll go back. Stephen Woolf.
Yeah, well, what I say is, firstly, it's very difficult to actually assess who's coming back from Syria or any of these countries if you can't count people who are coming in and coming out. We don't have a check at the system. You had a Raytheon system, did you not? It cost us £250 million, and they suggested we could actually count people in if we had a British line for British passports and a line for the rest of the world. But until you get something as sensible as that, you'll always have this difficulty in our borders, and you need to have a really joined-up relationship between our security services and our border agencies, which means more staff like the 2,500 that UKIP are proposing on the borders.
Vivek Cooper, there is a contradiction here. Your manifesto makes it clear a Labour government will stand up for citizens' individual rights, but you also want to bring back control orders which would effectively detain people even if they've not been convicted of any offence. Is this sort of human rights, pick and mix?
No, I think when you're dealing with sort of extreme terror threats, there are areas where you need strong powers, but you also need strong checks and balances to make sure those powers aren't abused. And that's what it's about. It's about making sure that we can protect both our security and our liberty. It's why we said we should have those relocation powers for the most extreme cases, where for all complicated reasons, often to do with secret intelligence, they cannot be prosecuted, but the courts agree that there is evidence that they pose a significant risk. In those cases, we should be able to use those relocation powers in order to keep people safe. Yeah, you've got to have checks and balances. Yeah, you've got to have judicial oversight, but also make sure we can keep people safe.
All right, let me ask, is it not a matter of concern, Home Secretary, given the number of British citizens who have gone to fight in Syria and have come back battle-hardened, knowing how to operate weapons, having built up jihadist connections? Is it not a matter of concern that only 1 person is under a TPIM? Under a modern control order?
I think the point is on this, Andrew, and it's something which I think I do differ with Yvette on, is that these are decisions that should be made primarily by the security services and law enforcement agencies. It is for them to come forward with these proposals. So they will look at individuals on a case-by-case basis who are returning and decide what action is appropriate. It's not for a Home Secretary to say everybody should be on a TPIM or everybody should be on a this or a that. That's where I differ from Yvette. So this is something that the professionals
do the security services not know who's come back?
No, the security services obviously are working very hard day in and day out.
We know that, but do they know do they know exactly who has gone? Because we don't count people on the way out or take a record, as the UKIP representative is saying. Do we know who's gone and do we know who has come back?
Well, we have actually introduced exit checks in the United Kingdom now. But the point that I'm making, Andrew, is that it is up to the security services and others to decide initially how they think any individual who comes back.
I understand it. My question, Home Secretary, was: do we know who has come back?
We do know people coming back. We have introduced extra legislation to ensure that we can manage the return of people who are coming back. Yeah. We have given our services the extra powers. You were making an assumption about a particular type of power, but it is for the security services to decide what happens to the individuals as they come back. We've given them extra powers. We've given them extra powers to stop people from going in the first place through the temporary removal of passports. We've changed the way the Royal Prerogative operates. I've removed passports from a number of individuals who otherwise might have been going out to get involved in terrorist activity.
There are real questions here about human rights and the way that you deal with the terror issue. Two of you among the five would have a Bill of Rights, a UK or British Bill of Rights. Three of you would stick with the European Court and the Human Rights Act as passed by the previous government. Theresa May, are you, I've used the phrase before, in a sense wanting to have the human rights that you want and they're no longer universal, you'll just take the ones that seem to work for you?
No, it's not about that. It's actually about saying that these decisions are decisions that should be taken here in the UK. Our Bill of Rights would establish that the Supreme Court was the body that would be making these determinations in the United Kingdom. You're absolutely right. I mean, there are issues around these questions of human rights. But what we see with the way that the European Court has acted, for example, it's been much harder to deport people from the UK.
Because they've got human rights?
Well, no, it's because of the way in which the court is actually sometimes overturning decisions that are taken here in the UK.
What we want to do
is to say that the Supreme Court should have that final say.
How different would it be to the Human Rights Act? I mean, which rights would you ditch? Right to be free from torture, right to privacy, right to free speech? Which rights would you ditch from the Human Rights Act?
We're not talking about ditching rights.
So would it be the same as the Human Rights Act?
What we have seen in the way...
Why wouldn't the Supreme Court do what the European Court does now and delay things and go through the due diligence process?
Because the European Court is actually a very political animal. It's often not got lawyers involved. Most of them aren't lawyers. Most of them have a jurisdiction understanding. Yeah, ours does. And ours is based on a common law system of which habeas corpus is at the principle, and they've got acquis communautaire at their principle, backed by a decision to keep the European Union.
OK, hold on. I just want to hear from Plaid Cymru. What is your attitude to the terrorist threat?
I think there's two things that are conflated here. One is the community aspect of this, where I think the current government was wrong to ditch actually the prevent strategy change it then.
The community side you did.
The community side was changed enormously, and that has been weakened. And we've seen that, I think, in communities in Wales, but throughout the United Kingdom. And that side has been weakened. The second part is what we've been discussing, which is the individuals. And there has been a change. I think the people coming back now from Syria and Iraq who have been radicalised will need a different approach than we've had in the past, because we haven't had that quite.
And what would that different approach be?
Well, I think there is something in the control orders that would need to be looked at.
All right.
I think that's a reasonable approach.
I thank you for that.
What I have
to
say is we have thrown out this community side of the prevent strategy. We need to get back.
No, you've said that already. So let me move on. Yvette Cooper, John Prescott, now a special advisor to Ed Miliband, I understand. He says he can understand why young people are radicalised by events in the Middle East. Quote, the kind of crusade that started with the invasion of Iraq. Do you recognise that link?
Well, we know that when young people talk about radicalisation, some of the things that they talk about are foreign policy, but we also know that they're being radicalised and groomed often by extremists who are, I think, manipulating, who are promoting barbarism, really. It's extremism and the attitudes that they promote. So I think the responsibility has to lie with those who are promoting extremism and
I understand that, but did the invasion of Iraq, as in Mr. Prescott's words, did that radicalise a generation?
To be honest, I think it's much more complicated than that, because often people will cite things around wider politics around the Middle East as well. And we also know that it is, I think, the lack of a proper community strategy to challenge these extremist ideas, to set out the different narrative, to challenge whether it's on social media. The fact that I think Theresa was wrong to cut back the community-led work on prevent was a big mistake.
She says she doesn't.
She cut back the number of areas from 90 to 30 that were covered by
quickly,
Prevent.
let Theresa May respond quickly.
What we did with the community aspect of Prevent was said that when it was being run from the Home Office, actually it was tainted with the concept that this was just about the Home Office spying on people. So we said it was more appropriate for the community aspect to be run by the communities and local government department.
But they haven't done it.
And that was right. Yes, they have been doing it.
Well, they haven't.
They have been taking. They have been taking. No, we still have a real challenge, and that's why it's important to have an extremism strategy, and that's why we have set out clearly what we would do in terms of this wider question of extremism.
Right.
But when
I've excluded more hate preachers than any Home Secretary before
10
me.
seconds.
When one girl went from Bethnal Green Academy to Syria, why was there no intervention in that school until after 3 more girls had gone?
Right.
That's what should have happened.
Some also wonder about the attitude of the parents in that particular case. But we will leave it there because it's time now for our politicians to make their final pitches to you on why their party has the best policies. They've got just 30 seconds and it's in reverse order. So Yvette Cooper goes first.
Well, I think the Tories and the Liberal Democrats have been complacent about crime and also the impact of what they've done to policing on justice and lack of prosecutions, particularly for victims of the most serious crimes. UKIP, at the same time, just want to divide our communities. Labour's got a different plan and a better plan. We'll keep the neighbourhood police on the beat, protect neighbourhood policing and our communities and keep our communities strong. And on immigration, we won't divide people. We want to make sure that the system is fair.
Thank you. Stephen Wolfe.
General elections matter. Your vote matters. Who you elect really does matter. And that's why I said you should be voting for UKIP in this election, because we are the only party that has common sense policies that will improve the lives of all Britons, wherever you're from and whoever you are. Ignore the press, the TV commentators, or indeed the language of the Labour Party you've just heard. Make up your own mind. Look up our manifesto on ukip.org. On May the 7th, you'll understand there's a party that believes in Britain because we believe in you.
Thank you. Norman Baker.
We have a good record in government in Home Affairs, contributing towards a record reduction in crime and taking steps, for example, to protect women who've been subject to violence and tackling female genital mutilation, really for the first time in this country. We will keep the government in future anchored in the centre ground without the extreme lurch to right and left, which would come from either a Labour majority or a Conservative majority government. We will follow the evidence. And ignore the prejudices of the press. We will make sure the immigration system works and that crime continues to fall.
Thank you. Theresa May.
I said at the beginning that there was a choice between a Labour Home Office, which they admitted was not fit for purpose, and a Conservative Home Office, giving the country the competent government that it deserves. And I think the debate has shown a stark choice today. We see a Labour Party that doesn't know what the right level of immigration is, that has no credible plans for reform of the police. People are now safer than ever before. Crime has come down by 1/4 over the last 5 years. A Conservative government in the future will reform free movement, will cut immigration, will keep cutting crime and defeat extremism.
Thank you. Simon Thomas.
Well, Plaid Cymru is a party that believes that government is better when it's taken closer to the people. And that's why we want the devolution of crime, policing and criminal justice to the National Assembly. But even if that does not happen for the next 5 years, our MPs in Westminster will stand up for tolerance, they will stand up for civil liberties, and they will work with all progressive forces in the House of Commons in order to fight austerity and get the right level of resources to our frontline policing. Plaid Cymru will be a voice for Wales in Westminster, but it will also be a voice for tolerance throughout the United Kingdom.
And that's it for today's debate. My thanks to all of our guests and, of course, to Mark Easton for being with us. Now, tomorrow is the turn of Defence and Security. I'll be joined by the by the Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon, the Shadow Defence Secretary, Vernon Coker, and several others from other parties. And the BBC's Mark Urban will be here just to help keep them honest. Plus, don't forget, the Daily Politics Election Special is back at noon tomorrow. From all of us here, goodbye.